freedom, pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dreams some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great and wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face that affects so many aspects of our lives and what we can do about it. We talk about all of the various forms of character disturbances, the things that I write about on my blog at www.manipulative-people.com and my website at drgeorgesimon.com, and also another blog that I write from called Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life at www.counselingresource.com. That's www.counselingresource.com. In addition to my own blog, as I mentioned before, manipulative-people.com, where I have many articles, timely articles, that supplement the works of my books, supplement the articles and supplement the chapters and material in my books. In Sheep's Clothing, the international bestseller, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People. And Character Disturbance, the phenomenon of our age, which is the in-depth study, my in-depth study, of all the disturbed character types out there, all the people who will cause you grief in your life and why they do it, what makes them the way they are, and what can be done about it. And also the Judas Syndrome, my book for the Christian faith community about how genuine faith can help elevate and transform a life. How genuine faith can truly save. So avail yourself, if you will, of my books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance and the Judas Syndrome, and tune into this program every week where we talk about how much character matters and matters especially to our freedoms. At the beginning and close of this show, you hear a theme song that is a patriotic piece extolling the virtues of freedom. And it is an undeniable truth that the framers of our Constitution knew that the kinds of liberty that they were trying to guarantee citizens of this country would make for a society that would not work. They knew this. The society would not work were it not for what they called, quote, a religious and moral people, end quote. Moral being the really key word. Because you don't have to subscribe to a particular religion to be of upstanding moral character. But they knew, the founders did, the framers did, they knew that lots of liberty would invite disaster if people didn't have a solid internal moral compass to guide their actions. Leave good people alone and they'll do wonderful things. They'll prosper and they'll bring others along for the ride. They'll build great societies. First, they'll build their families, strong and secure, upstanding. Then they'll build their communities because they're comprised of those families. And those communities will form a great nation. They knew this. But it all hinges on character. And we, unfortunately, for the last several decades, have been in the age of permissiveness and entitlement, and it has spawned an unprecedented degree of character disturbance that affects every aspect of our lives. Relationships don't hold together. Marriages don't hold together. Communities are torn apart. And the country is as divided as ever. This is the price we pay for a characterless society. And we have to turn it around. We have to turn it around. And toward that end, I write and I speak. I speak this year to professionals. Beginning next Tuesday, I will arrive in Sioux Falls, South Dakota for a workshop on Wednesday. And then I'll be traveling also to Omaha, Nebraska, and Des Moines, Iowa for workshops there on Thursday and Friday. Just a beginning of another tour to train professionals in how to understand and deal with character-impaired people. I'm asked so many times, probably, well, at least 50 times a month. It's the most frequent contact I get, either through my blog at manipulative-people.com or through direct email or through some other kind of contact. People find me on Google or something. I'm asked all the time, can you please tell me who I can go to see who gets it with respect to dealing with a disturbed character in my life? Someone who will actually give me some helpful guidance and support. It might actually do us some good. I've sought help before and gotten no help, leading many to think that there is no hope when it comes to character disturbance. And while there is hope, it is a difficult situation to deal with. As anyone who's dealt with a character-disturbed person knows. And toward that end, I've been posting a series of articles on the manipulative-people.com blog on narcissists. Once again, this topic is pretty timely, and it's a popular topic. I've written numerous articles on the blog on this, and in this particular series of articles, I'm focusing on various aspects of the two types of narcissist, and also what happens. What happens with these folks when things start going south for them? It's not a pretty sight. When these folks who have almost delusional self-esteem, almost delusionally inflated, they think so much of themselves that it almost represents a delusion of grandeur. It's not a true delusion because they're not technically crazy. In other words, it's not a belief that doesn't have any foundation in reality. That's part of an illness, a brain disease, a biochemistry problem. But it borders on it. And it can easily become that. Because these folks think inordinately of themselves. And so the current series, the most recent articles, is dealing with what happens when reality sets in and things happen in life that challenge the narcissistic individual's grandiose self-image. And I invited folks to share some stories, and they already have. I've gotten about a half a dozen emails from folks sharing their stories of what happened with them and what can happen in the aftermath of basically the house of cards tumbling down with a narcissistic individual. Perhaps you have such a story. Perhaps you yourself know exactly what can happen when this person who thought they were all that meets reality, and the reality of failure sets in, and everybody else has to pay the blame. Everybody else has to pay the price because they can't accept their own personal failure or their shortcomings or their errors in judgment, or most especially their shortcomings of character that led to their downfall. So everybody else gets blamed. At any rate, if you want to join the conversation, or if you want to share your story, or if you just want to make a comment or share something you think the audience would be interested in, if you have a comment on any of the articles written on the blog, a question to ask about something in any of the books, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I'm happy to take your call, and we'll have a nice chat. I want to talk for a minute, though, about the most recent article on the manipulative-people.com blog, where I mention the classical thinking on narcissistic individuals. We now know from pretty good evidence, scientific evidence, that there really are two different kinds of narcissists. I knew this early on when I was doing research. When I was doing clinical case study research for my first book, In Sheep's Clothing, I realized very early on that there were some narcissistic individuals, folks who had this air of superiority, this haughtiness, this air of competence and self-assuredness, this grandiose kind of self-image. I knew that there were some of these folks, a fair number, actually most of the folks like this that I was encountering, who were not, like the classic textbooks used to tell us, were inwardly insecure individuals struggling with low self-esteem and compensating for it with this exterior facade of greatness. They might, the thinking was back in the old days that while these folks might think they were all that and think they were always right, underneath it all, They were trying to prove something because underneath it all, they didn't feel so good about themselves, and they didn't feel all that competent, and they didn't feel all that right. So they put on this facade. They did their best to convince everybody that they were somebody, even though underneath it all they didn't feel like they were anybody. Well, I realized early on that there were folks, plenty of them, who really did think they were all that. They really did think they were God's gift. They really did think that they were a special creation of nature, that they had unique talents and abilities that went way beyond the pale. And here's the key: they really did see themselves not only as superior to other individuals, but because they saw themselves as superior, they felt entitled. They felt entitled to use and abuse those they saw as less valuable, as mere peons, as mere pawns in the chess game of life. That's how they saw it. So I realized early on that there were some narcissists who were not of the quote-unquote neurotic type. They weren't putting on a facade. They weren't compensating for anything. They weren't trying to prove something that they inwardly knew they weren't. They really thought, sincerely, that they were all that. Sometimes they actually had a few things to show for it. They might be successful business people. They might be gifted academics or skilled doctors, lawyers, whatnot. So they might actually have some claim to some fame or some at least decent reputation. But in other cases, there was nothing to back up their grandiose claims. Nonetheless, they thought to the core, to the bone, that they were something special. And as something special, they were deserving and they were entitled. And they acted that way throughout their life and through all their relationships, with all the problems that it caused. So I realized this early on, and I, in my first book, in Sheep's Clothing, and in my second book, Character Disturbance, I decided to call these two different types the neurotic narcissist and the character disturbed narcissist. That's how I sought to divide them. Well, in the research literature these days, the current terms in use for these two narcissists that folks have come to appreciate really do exist are the vulnerable type and the grandiose type. I think that these labels are a little bit misleading because grandiosity as a self-presentation is something that either of these two types is capable of. So when you see grandiosity in someone, they can either be of this quote-unquote vulnerable type or the grandiose type. And that's why I think the grandiose label is problematic and why I still prefer my neurotic to character disturbed distinction. But that's neither here nor there, really. At least there is some recognition of the fact that there really are people who aren't haughty by pretense. They're haughty to the core. They really sincerely do believe in their greatness. And sometimes their belief about themselves borders, and I'm being very careful here, borders on the delusional. I had a reader of the blog comment on my most recent article that these individuals are in fact delusional. Well, most of them aren't, but it sure looks that way to the casual observer. And now, does that mean necessarily that they can't become truly delusional? No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, I believe that there's a very slippery slope between the narcissist who is convinced of their own greatness and is convinced that they're all that and acts that way. That there is a very fine line between that individual and the individual who has gone pretty berserk with their grandiose self-image and become delusional. I think that there's a continuum there. Fortunately, most narcissists, even of the grandiose type, are not delusional. They're not truly crazy. But they can sure look it. Now, what I want to say tonight is a bit, more than a bit, controversial. Because as you know, these days, there is a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis, that is pretty popular. And a lot of people get on medicine. Medicine which helps, by the way. And I'm sorry for clearing my throat without pressing the cough button here on the mic, but I have really been fighting a cold that I have not quite shaken. So bear with me, I'm afraid. I might have one of these spasms again, but I apologize for it. But to make a long story short, there are a lot of folks these days that are diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, some of them actually have the disease. In its truest form, a bipolar disorder is a brain disease. It's characterized by a chemical imbalance that has a person oftentimes swinging between psychotic levels of elation and psychotic levels of depression, morbid depression, self-destructive depression. So it's a real illness. But I'm going to say something very controversial here. This illness doesn't develop overnight, and it has character underpinnings. And many times the illness itself has not really fully developed. In other words, a person may be given the label because they're given medicines that actually help stabilize a person's mood, make them less impulsive, calm them down a bit, level out their moods somewhat, and therefore they behave better. They seem to feel better, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they had the disease. What I'm saying is that much of the time, not all the time, There are individuals, there are some unfortunate individuals who, through no fault of their own, these are individuals who are solid in character from the start, and something goes wrong with their brain. There are these individuals. But they're rare. More common are the individuals who start off as narcissists. It's a character formation issue, a character malformation issue. And what happens is they get into a cycle because being narcissistic and being all full of themselves and being all hyper elated and grandiose in their self-appraisal, they get to feeling invincible, they get to feeling all that, they get to feeling like they can do anything. And inevitably, at some point, reality catches up with them and they crash. Now, many times what they first do is they just basically pretend that nothing's happened, that everything's just fine. We call this denial. They pretend that everything's just fine, that the world isn't falling apart around them, that they haven't really messed things up. So they use denial to just basically block reality out. And the other thing they do is they blame everyone and everything else. And so they keep on going. They keep on with their irrational, unrealistic self-assessment. But then maybe one day, reality comes crashing in so hard, and so undeniably so, and there's no way to successfully blame others. And that's when the narcissist turns on themselves. And they break down. And that's the cycle that's called bipolar disorder. Now, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if mental health professionals, as opposed to just giving individuals whose brain chemistry had gotten so out of whack that they were having these manic or depressive episodes, wouldn't it be nice if they could act prophylactically, preventatively, proactively, intervening with the narcissist early on, modifying their inflated self-perceptions, their inflated sense of self-worth, their inflated sense of personal power, their unwarranted elation about what they're capable of. Wouldn't it be nice if we could intervene in the early stages and forestall the inevitable crash? Well, the fact is that we can. And what I'm going to be doing in my workshop training with professionals is I'm going to be pointing out that we can, in fact, treat character disturbance. What we can't do is treat it like we've always treated other psychological conditions. We can't use the methods that most people were taught to intervene. We especially can't use the conceptual frameworks, the theoretical frameworks that many of us were taught to view the human psyche. We can't use those either, because if we do, it sets us on the wrong track to understanding what's really going on with these folks, how to really help, what's really going wrong and why people in relations with these folks are having a hard time, what they can do about it. Our old models bias our views about what's really going on so that we can't tell. We can't tell the nature of circumstances. It's like the old story about removing the speck from your brother's eye before you remove the log or beam in your own. When you've got major distortions going on in your own perspective, you can't see clearly to deal with even the small defects in someone else's character. And our major psychological paradigms, our traditional ones anyway, put huge biases in front of us. They distort our viewpoint. We can't see what's really going on if we're looking through those lenses. So what I'm going to be doing in my training workshops, starting this coming Wednesday, is I'm going to be urging folks to adopt a new way of looking at things. A different way of conceptualizing their clients' problems. I'm going to be talking to professionals trying to help individuals in an age of more rampant character disturbance. Individual therapists who are seeing individuals who, for the most part, have character-related problems and who have been hesitant to address those problems directly. Maybe because they're afraid to, maybe because they don't feel that it's possible to make changes in a person's basic character. There are a lot of folks who believe that. There are a lot of folks who believe that a person never changes their stripes, so to speak. That once personality and character is in place, it's unchangeable. There are even some folks who believe that all aspects of character are biologically predisposed and therefore they can't be changed. Those folks are misguided. Things can change, but it's a whole different approach to change. And that's what I'm going to be lecturing on, and I'm going to be demonstrating with vignettes. One of these days, I'm going to have some actors craft video vignettes so that I can demonstrate in more vivid detail how the corrective process works with character-impaired individuals. Haven't done that yet, but would like to do that for the near future. At any rate, I know that if you're listening tonight, the likelihood is that you have had some experience with a narcissistic individual who's had one of those narcissistic meltdowns where reality finally caught up with their grandiose self-image, where the proverbial crap hit the fan, and where they weren't yet prepared to reckon with their own failure or their own role in the mess that had occurred. But the mess was so big that it was undeniable. So somebody had to be faulted. And maybe that somebody was you. If you've got a story like that, I'd like to hear from you. Hello and welcome to Character Matters.
Well, hello, Dr. Simon. How are you?
I'm just fine. How are you tonight?
I'm all right. This is Susan from Virginia.
Hi, Susan.
I've been listening tonight, and I was wanting to ask you a question.
Okay.
Do you think that there is any genetic basis for the predisposition of certain illnesses in family bloodlines?
Can you be a little bit more specific? Absolutely, there are genetic bases to or predispositions for a lot of illnesses, including personality disorders. We know this from twin studies. We know this from other studies. Can you be a little bit more specific, though, about your question? Do you have a particular condition in mind?
Yes, bipolar.
Yes. I said that what I was saying earlier was going to be controversial. I do believe that in a certain percentage of the population, the evidence to me looks like, as I read the evidence, it looks like there are about 2 to 3% of the population that is predisposed to an illness that is strictly biologically based. And that predisposition is biological. Whether there is a genetic component to it or not, we don't know for sure yet. But genes are likely to play a role, as are other biological factors. There's some biological predisposition. There's no question about that. And there's also no question about the fact that in those cases, folks who have this predisposition can look very much like someone in younger life who has kind of a personality disturbance, when in fact what we're seeing is the emergence of this disorder, but it's not fully manifest yet. But that's a small percentage of the population, and that's why I said what I was going to say earlier was so controversial. In my years of doing clinical case consultation and therapy, I have seen infinitely more cases where individuals started out with personality problems and no predisposing history. And because they just kept getting worse, they never got the appropriate intervention. And as you know, personality disordered folks are not particularly prone to seek help. As a matter of fact, they usually have to be drug in by the ear by somebody or forced in. And then they come begrudgingly, and then they don't invest themselves, typically. You may have had that experience yourself, but I mean, that's the typical case. So, but I've seen far more individuals who are personality disturbed to start with, and because that never got arrested and only got worse, they progressed. Now, let me make an analogy to you so that maybe it makes some sense. There is a biological predisposition, we know, for such diseases as, say, diabetes. But there are very few folks who are genetically earmarked for the type 1 type diabetes. In other words, where they're going to develop diabetes simply because they have that biological predisposition, and it's going to happen no matter what they do. Rather, most everyone, the vast majority of folks diagnosed with diabetes have the type 2 variety, and they gave it to themselves with repetitive behaviors.
Yes.
They kept eating those simple starches, and they kept overeating them. They kept doing the Big Macs and the French fries, despite all the evidence, right? And they did this day after day, year after year. Well, you do things over and over again, and your body has a reaction to that. And yes, their body chemistry eventually went way out of whack, but it did so because they were behaving in a certain way over and over again. I'm using an analogy here.
Let me throw a monkey wrench in here for you.
Okay.
You and I both know that a lot of people try to self-medicate with food because carbohydrates causes the release of serotonin, which makes you feel better.
Right.
How many people with the diabetic predisposition would not have been diabetic unless, of course, they had character disorders that caused them to try to self-medicate with food? I've seen that many times. A lot of these type 2 people, they're huge.
Yeah.
And they crave sugars and starches, simple carbohydrates, just because they are unknowingly trying to self-medicate their mental condition with food.
Yeah.
So to me, there's a very direct line there.
Yeah. Well, you sound like a very conscientious woman here who's looking at our cultural problems here. How about if I add even one more monkey wrench? Because I like the monkey wrench that you added there. We see all these sensationalistic news stories, outrage over certain things, and certainly the things that make the news, some of them truly are outrageous. But how many people, day in and day out, how many people are completely dysfunctional, have not acquired the internal resources to modulate their emotions, to guide their behavior, to control their impulses, to preserve their relationships. And so therefore everything falls apart at work and at home and on the streets. This is a crisis of incredible proportions that we don't have people who are capable of responsibly leading their lives. And I don't see news flashes. I don't see the media going crazy every day railing about what I consider to be the phenomenon of our time. In my opinion, this is the bigger epidemic.
Yes, and I will agree with you on that. Let me take this back a few years. I noticed a dramatic and drastic change in societal norm with the television, the first series, Survivor. I watched a half hour of that show. I turned it off. I have never watched a reality show since because I was horrified. They were glorifying these people who were conniving, backstabbing, manipulating, doing everything they can, any dirty trick in the book, and making it seem like this was a normal thing to do. From that one show, Survivor, how many reality shows of that genre have proliferated until the point where I'm going to have to say a majority of people in this country think that that is a normal way to behave.
Yeah.
Because people watch that idiot box and they learned from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that it had a major impact on our society's mental state.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just television programs or movies or any of those things. There are so many elements within our culture that not only reinforce, as you point out, they not only reinforce these kinds of attitudes, but they promote them, and they enable dysfunction. So
yes, they glorify dysfunction. That's exactly it. They glorify dysfunction.
Yeah.
Someone asked me, "Well, have you watched the Kardashians?" And I'll admit, I was feeling my oats that day, and I was a little bit on edge, and so I said, "Oh, Cardassians." Now, that was the lizard-looking people on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
This person was absolutely flabbergasted.
Well, you seem like a thoughtful person on this. Let me ask you a pointed question then. What do you think is the most insidious aspect of these kinds of programs? Let's take the Kardashians, for example. What do you think is the most insidious and damaging aspect of the message that these kinds of things send?
That, to me, it comes across that the primary goal should be promoting yourself above any and all other interests, that you are the center of your own little universe, that you are the glorious sun in the center, and everyone should pay attention to you. It promotes self-glorification to the point of, in my opinion, mental illness.
Yeah. I think I think you're right on the money there, and I think in addition to that, it also sends the message that you can be that dysfunctional and still have lots of money and lots of power and influence and lots of fame.
You'll be worshipped.
Yeah.
And that's what this self-seeking behavior, and it is perpetuating. Yeah. And it's like a steamroller going downhill with no brakes.
Okay, if you'll indulge me, one last question. Yeah. What do you think this necessarily means for where we're going? What's got to be the end result?
The end result of all of this is a total break with the reality of God. Because God is as real to me as you are. My relationship with Him is one-on-one. It's very personal. Without that relationship, I could not have the clarity and the sight that I have. Because I look at the world and see it not for what I want it to be, not for what other people want me to see it as, but I see it as it really is. It's dysfunctional. Yeah. And I'm afraid that as this continues, as this self perpetuates, God gets pushed further and further out of the picture.
Yeah.
This bears back to the conversation we had last time, how the biggest problem with religion is religion. Religion as a social acceptance ritual cannot stand against that steamroller because it's empty. The only thing that can stand in the face of that steamroller is an actual, real, one-on-one relationship with God, which each person must have. Because you cannot stand by up to this under your own strength. You can't do it.
Well, we have to have a much longer conversation one of these days, don't we?
Yes, sir.
Don't we?
Yes, sir.
As a matter of fact, I've been planning that for some time. I'm not sure exactly when to do it, but I want to dedicate a program to the Judas syndrome.
Okay.
Because I don't often do that. And, as a psychologist, I felt it necessary. I don't, from a psychological point of view, the acknowledgement of some kind of higher entity is absolutely essential, even if you're not a believer in God per se. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very careful in my psychological works to make that point. Even the 12-step people know this very, very well. And when they have people come into their program, a very successful program, by the way, when it's worked appropriately, when they have people come into that program who are not particularly religious, they're able to buy into it because they're able to understand the higher power operating in their life and in the world in any way that they want to. Yes. But to acknowledge that there at least is something more, something higher, is so crucial. But I am a person of faith, and I wrote the book, The Judas Syndrome, for people of faith. And I've been a little remiss. I'm building the audience here, And so I haven't yet moved into that territory. But I'm going to, and when I do, I hope you'll be listening, and I hope maybe even you'll call in and contribute to the conversation.
Oh, I'd be delighted to, Dr. Simon. I'm a person of faith. My faith is in God. It is not in any particular denomination. It is not in religion per se. My faith is in God and God alone.
Mm-hmm.
And His relationship with me and my relationship with Him, that is the cornerstone, the foundation of my life. And quite frankly, I cannot imagine living life without it. And I understand these people are so lost, and they're hungering, and they're seeking, and they're searching. So when they see this mess on TV and in the movies, they latch onto it because it's something.
Yes.
Even if it only leads to, self grandiosity.
Yes.
It's something.
Yeah, it's something. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And that's why I think that this steamroll is picking up steam, because people are starved to death to believe in something.
Yeah.
And they're reaching out, they're grasping at anything. And the fact that it is the worst possible part of our human nature that they're grabbing onto,
Yeah.
that point escapes them. As one of the other callers pointed out, he said that churches had dropped the ball. And I think I have to agree with him, because when a church preaches nothing more than social acceptance rituals without teaching about the reality of God, then it's empty. It does not fill. These people still feel empty, and they still reach out for something, anything, to believe in.
Well,
and look up easy prey.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on this, and I really appreciate your other questions. Thanks for calling in tonight.
Yes, and I do have one more question
Sure.
about the bipolar.
Sure.
Okay, we both agree that we feel that there is a genetic predisposition. However, some people can go their entire life without developing overt symptoms. However, does not environment, especially home environment, let's say in a dysfunctional family, abusive father, absent mother, whatever, is that not one of the, shall we say, precluding features for this to develop?
Yeah, in my book, Character Disturbance, I make the point that character formation is a multidimensional construct. Environment plays a role, genetic and other biological factors play a role, and there's a dynamic interaction between these things that all assist in character formation. But here's something else that's really important, and I'm glad you raised this point, and that is this. You know, we live in a world where some really crazy things happen.
Yes.
You know, trauma happens.
Yes.
And biology is biology. I have some pretty bad genes, I got to tell you. I have a back that's been operated on a number of times, and it's still a mess, you know. And a few years ago, I didn't think I would be walking. Thank goodness I'm walking right now. But I deal with a lot of things. And I don't want to bore you because my back is just one item on the list. So I've got a lot of bad genes. But I also know individuals with similar problems and similar background problems. I had some problems in my background too. Character is that thing that gets us through these things. And gets us through these things. It's not that we're completely unscarred. Nobody gets through this life completely unscarred.
Correct.
But character is kind of like an immune system. It's kind of like a way to weather the storm. Have you not known people in your life who have been through hell and back and have been dealt every kind of bad card imaginable and still managed to be some really incredible people?
Good people, yes.
Good people.
I have.
And this...
I have. And someone that once asked me, said, how do you define character? So I told him, I said, character is what you do when you think no one is looking.
Yeah.
You come to a stop sign. Do you breeze through it because there's no cop on the corner, or do you stop like the law says you should?
Yeah.
If you find a $10 bill laying in the church pew after you get up, what do you do with it? Do you look around to see if anybody's watching and stuff it in your pocket, or do you take it forward and put it in the plate because you're sure that's where it belonged in the first place? Character is those things that you do when there's no one watching you, no one checking up on you. It's how you behave towards yourself and the world at large.
I don't have anything to add to that. Well, thank you again so much. You had great questions tonight. I'm sure the audience really appreciated it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Simon. You don't know how much I appreciate your work.
Well, thank you so.
You are a much-needed voice of sanity in an increasingly insane world.
In a Kardashian world.
I still prefer the Kardashians.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Simon.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was a great call, and I appreciate it very much, as do I appreciate all the contributors to the program and to the blog especially. You know, I can't say it enough, so I'll say it again. The commentators on my blog are some of the greatest people, and they have some great information. Do yourself a favor. If you've not visited manipulative-people.com before, go to my blog at www.manipulative-people.com. Also, counselingresource.com. That's www.counseling.com. And my website at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. Avail yourself of the information there. And if you haven't done so, avail yourself of my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, and the Judas Syndrome. And I as I promised the listener, I am going to devote a program to the Judas Syndrome here in the next couple of months. And so be prepared, audience. We're going to get not religious on you, but we're going to get pretty spiritual, and we're going to get pretty higher power centered, and on a program in a couple of months, and talk some real basis of the kind of faith that can really save. And for those of you of faith who want to share some of your own experiences, especially, as well as your ideas, that'll be a time for you to call in. I'm especially interested in hearing from folks who know exactly what I'm talking about the power of a faith that can truly transform a life because it's genuine, that it establishes a relationship that wasn't there before, and a relationship that transforms. So if you've got such a story to share, I definitely want to hear from you. I'll be traveling, like I said, all next week. I'll be doing the training in Sioux Falls and in Des Moines and in Omaha. And these workshops are open. You can find information on the blog site and on the website. Go to manipulative-people.com. Look under the seminars page tab. You'll get the information there. They are open. Just a caution, they are for professionals. You can attend, but they're geared for the professionals. I'll be heavily involved with them, and the prices, therefore, are a bit hefty. But you're welcome, and I invite you again to tune in to Character Matters next week at the same time. I'm Dr. George Simon. I appreciate you tuning in. See you there.